Christmas morning, 2024. A father lies dead in his bed. His own daughter made the 911 call, but a neighbor's doorbell camera was about to reveal the truth no one expected. In the quiet town of Billings, Montana, December 25th began like any other holiday morning, except at one modest home on the west side. William Anderson, a 42-year-old high school science teacher, had been shot 3 times in his chest while he slept. His 16-year-old daughter Emma was the one who called emergency services at 6:27 a.m., her voice shaking with panic as she described an intruder who'd broken into their home. The city of Billings knew bitter cold winters, but never violence like this, especially not on Christmas Day. When first responders arrived at the snow-dusted crime scene, they discovered William still in his bed, the bedding drenched in blood. A living room window appeared to have been jimmied open from outside. But before we dive deeper into what really happened that morning, hit that subscribe button below. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these deep dive investigations coming. Now, let's uncover the truth. Emma sat on the couch, wrapped in an emergency blanket. Her blonde hair was messy, her blue eyes seemed empty. She kept telling officers the same story. She'd been asleep when gunshots woke her. Terrified, she'd hidden in her bedroom for almost an hour before finding the courage to check on her father. That's when she discovered his body and immediately dialed 911. On the surface, her story checked out. The forced window, missing items, William's wallet, his watch. Emma's convincing display of shock. Everything pointed to a home invasion turned deadly. Detective Adrian Mitchell, who'd spent 15 years with the Billings Police Department, wrote in his initial assessment that the girl seemed genuinely traumatized. Yet something nagged at him. Something about the way she carried herself felt practiced. William's bedroom painted a picture of violent struggle. The nightstand had been knocked over. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. Defensive wounds on his hands showed he'd woken up fighting for his life. The murder weapon, a .306 hunting rifle that belonged to William himself, was discovered in the backyard near the fence, half buried in snow. It looked like someone had tried to hide it while escaping. 3 empty shell casings littered the bedroom floor. The coroner would later confirm that any single shot would have killed him. This wasn't about survival. This was about rage. Somewhere between 4 and 6:20 a.m. on Christmas morning, according to the medical examiner's first assessment. This added a layer of horror to an already devastating scene. In Billings, where wide-open spaces can feel both freeing and lonely, the Anderson house suddenly became ground zero for the city's attention. News vans crowded the street as neighbors gathered on their lawns in shocked clusters. Christmas decorations created an eerie backdrop to the grim investigation unfolding behind the police tape. Emma was taken downtown for questioning, officially to remove her from the traumatic scene. She wasn't a suspect yet. Detective Mitchell ordered officers to canvass the neighborhood, hoping someone had seen or heard something unusual in those early morning hours. He never imagined a neighbor's security camera would crack the case wide open. The Anderson home was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with fading green siding. Christmas lights still hung along the roof. Inside, a small artificial tree stood in the front window. Beneath it sat wrapped presents that would never be opened. Several with tags reading, "To Dad," "Love Emma." The kitchen counter held remnants of their Christmas Eve, cookie cutters, a flour-dusted rolling pin, a plate of decorated cookies under plastic wrap. These homey details clashed horribly with the violence that had erupted hours later. Even seasoned investigators found themselves unsettled by the contrast between holiday warmth and brutal murder. William's bedroom at the end of the hallway had become his final resting place. Blood spatter analysis would reveal that the first shot was fired from the doorway while William slept. The next 2 shots came at closer range after he'd awakened and tried to defend himself. The hunting rifle, a Remington 700 with a walnut stock that William used for deer hunting in the nearby mountains, required significant strength to operate its bolt-action mechanism between shots. This detail would become crucial later. Would a panicked intruder really take the time to chamber multiple rounds instead of fleeing after the first shot, especially if they were supposedly surprised to find someone home? As the initial investigation stretched into Christmas afternoon, the Anderson family's history began emerging through neighbor interviews. William had been raising Emma alone since his wife Jennifer lost her battle with breast cancer 5 years ago. Neighbors described William as strict but loving, a devoted father who'd coached Emma's middle school science club and rarely missed her volleyball games. Several mentioned that William had seemed worried about Emma's behavior lately. One neighbor recalled hearing an argument about curfew just days before the murder. Emma's first statement described a normal Christmas Eve, baking cookies with her dad, watching It's a Wonderful Life. Going to bed around 10:30 p.m., she claimed she'd slept soundly until gunshots startled her awake shortly after 6 a.m. That's when she hid in her closet until she was certain the intruder had gone. Her bedroom door stayed closed all night, she insisted. She'd seen and heard nothing until the gunfire, a critical detail that would soon be shattered by unexpected evidence. The teenager's emotions seemed to shift between breakdowns and unsettling calm as she described finding her father's blood-soaked body. This pattern caught the attention of experienced investigators. It didn't fit with genuine trauma. By nightfall on Christmas Day, while most Billings families finished their holiday meals, the Anderson home remained lit by harsh police floodlights. Technicians worked late into the night, documenting blood patterns, collecting fibers, casting impressions of footprints in the snow outside the supposedly forced window. Emma spent the night at her aunt's house across town, still maintaining her intruder story and expressing what seemed like appropriate grief over her father's death. Detective Mitchell, however, was already requesting warrants for Emma's phone records and social media accounts, standard procedure in homicide cases, even when family members appeared to be victims rather than suspects. William Anderson had taught at Billings West High School for 15 years. He taught AP chemistry and coached the nationally ranked Science Olympiad team. Colleagues remembered him as passionate about education, the kind of teacher who arrived early, stayed late, and spent weekends helping students with projects or college applications. His classroom was famous for engaging demonstrations and hands-on experiments. Former students often returned during college breaks to thank him for inspiring their scientific careers. 2 years before his death, William received the Montana Science Educator of the Year Award. The citation praised his ability to make complex concepts accessible while pushing students to exceed their expectations. Beyond his professional life, William was remembered as a dedicated single father who'd reorganized everything after his wife's death to make Emma's well-being his top priority. Family photos covered the walls of their home. William and Emma hiking in the Beartooth Mountains, fishing along the Yellowstone River, smiling together at her middle school graduation. Neighbors recalled William turning down dates and social invitations if they conflicted with Emma's activities. Emma needs stability right now, not a parade of new people in her life, he'd tell friends. His dedication meant learning to cook proper meals, understanding teenage girl fashion, becoming both mother and father while maintaining his demanding teaching career. William's sister, Catherine Anderson Walsh, shared during a tearful interview that her brother had recently expressed concerns about changes in Emma's behavior and friend group. Will called me about 2 weeks before Christmas, worried that Emma was pulling away and keeping secrets, Catherine told Detective Mitchell. He said she'd become defensive about her phone, was breaking curfew, seemed to be lying about where she was going after school. Will thought drugs or a bad crowd might be involved. He never imagined anything that could lead to this. Born and raised in Billings, William had deep Montana roots stretching back to the early 1900s. His father worked the railroads while his mother taught elementary school, instilling in William a strong work ethic and appreciation for education that shaped his career path. After earning his chemistry degree at Montana State and completing a master's in education, William returned to his hometown specifically to give back to the community that had supported him. The Anderson name was respected throughout Billings, making the shocking Christmas murder even more incomprehensible to those who'd known William his entire life. William's passion for the outdoors was legendary among friends and students. Summer breaks typically found him leading wilderness expeditions for the Sierra Club or working on environmental conservation projects. His hunting rifles, including the weapon that would end his life, were always properly secured in a gun safe. He used them only for ethical hunting trips where he taught Emma about respecting nature and taking only what was needed. William donated much of his deer meat to the local food bank each year, seeing hunting as a connection to Montana heritage rather than sport. The irony that his own careful, carefully maintained rifle would become his murder weapon wouldn't be lost on prosecutors building their case. The Christmas Eve before his murder had followed traditions William maintained since Emma was small. Cutting a fresh tree from a permitted forest area, baking their secret recipe sugar cookies, watching classic holiday movies together. Text messages from William's phone showed him reaching out to family with warm wishes and confirming plans for Christmas dinner. His final text, sent to his sister at 9:48 p.m. on Christmas Eve, read, "Merry Christmas. Emma and I had a nice evening baking cookies. Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Love you." In the faculty lounge at Billings West High School, a makeshift memorial appeared spontaneously when news of William's death spread. It grew to include candles, photos, and dozens of heartfelt notes from current and former students. "Mr. A showed me I could do things I never thought possible," read one card from a former student now studying chemistry at MIT. "He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The school's principal described William as the teacher everyone wanted for their child. Challenging but kind, demanding but supportive, the rare educator who connected with every student regardless of ability or background. The autopsy revealed William had been in excellent physical condition for a 42-year-old. No health issues would have shortened his life. The medical examiner noted that without murder, William could reasonably have expected another 30 to 40 years. Decades where he might have seen Emma graduate college, walked her down the aisle, held grandchildren, continued inspiring generations of students. This potential future, erased in seconds by 3 rifle rounds, would be emphasized by prosecutors as they built their case around what had been stolen from William, from his students, from the Billings community. The brutal manner of William's death contrasted sharply with the gentle, patient man everyone described. Medical evidence showed he'd awakened during the attack. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms revealed he'd tried to shield himself. Blood spatter patterns on the headboard and wall suggested he was sitting up in bed when the final shot struck at close range, likely looking directly at his killer in his last moments. This detail would haunt those who knew the case intimately. William Anderson died looking into the face of his own daughter, the child he'd devoted his life to raising after her mother's death. William's funeral, delayed until after New Year due to the ongoing investigation, drew over 800 mourners from across Montana and neighboring states. Former students traveled from Boston and San Francisco to pay respects to the teacher who'd shaped their futures. The high school gymnasium, the only Billings venue large enough, filled to capacity as colleagues, students, and community members shared stories of William's kindness, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to education. Emma Anderson was notably absent. Her arrest had occurred days earlier, a fact that sent shocked whispers through the gathering, despite Catherine's efforts to focus the service on celebrating her brother's life rather than the circumstances of his death. Detective Adrian Mitchell arrived at the Anderson home 20 minutes after Emma's 911 call, navigating his unmarked car through nearly empty Christmas morning streets. The detective, known for his methodical approach and sharp eye for detail, immediately noticed inconsistencies that triggered his investigative instincts. The allegedly forced window showed pry marks on the outside frame, but the pattern seemed unusual. Too neat, too deliberate, like someone had studied break-ins from television rather than actually committing one. The house showed no signs of ransacking. Only William's wallet and watch were missing, despite valuable electronics sitting in plain sight in the living room. Initial forensic processing revealed a crime scene that would yield crucial evidence in coming days. The hunting rifle found in the backyard snow had been wiped clean of prints, but later testing would reveal traces of Emma's DNA on the bolt-action mechanism. Gunshot residue tests on Emma's hands came back positive, a fact she initially explained by saying she checked her father's pulse and touched the area around his wounds. The medical examiner's preliminary report showed William had been shot between 4 and 5:30 a.m., based on body temperature and blood coagulation. This contradicted Emma's claim that she'd heard shots just before calling 911 at 6:27 a.m. As uniformed officers canvassed the neighborhood, a crucial piece of evidence emerged that would ultimately crack the case wide open. Trevor Phillips, who lived directly across the street, mentioned to officers that his Ring doorbell camera had a view of the Anderson home's front, including Emma's bedroom window. "I installed it after someone stole packages last year," Phillips explained. It records whenever there's motion on the street or when someone approaches our door. The footage Detective Mitchell immediately requested revealed a critical contradiction to Emma's story. Her bedroom light could be seen turning on and off multiple times between 4:12 a.m. and 5:48 a.m. during the exact time frame when she claimed to be asleep until gunshots woke her. The Ring camera footage became the investigation's breakthrough, providing irrefutable proof that someone was active in Emma's room during the critical period. The camera's night vision clearly showed Emma's bedroom window illuminating and darkening repeatedly, with particularly noticeable activity around 4:40 a.m., approximately, when the medical examiner believed William had been killed. Detective Mitchell obtained a search warrant for Emma's phone and laptop based on this contradictory evidence, suspecting the motive might be found in her communications. The warrant also allowed officers to return and conduct a more thorough search of Emma's bedroom, where they discovered blood-spattered clothing hidden inside a ventilation duct accessible by removing a register in her closet floor. Emma's initial police interview, conducted while she was still considered a witness rather than suspect, revealed a teenager maintaining remarkable composure despite occasional emotional displays that never quite reached her eyes. She recounted hearing 3 distinct gunshots that woke her from deep sleep, followed by sounds of someone moving through the house. "I was so scared I hid in my closet without making a sound," she told Mitchell, her voice quavering appropriately. "I waited until I was sure they were gone before coming out and finding Dad." When confronted with the Ring camera evidence during follow-up questioning, Emma's carefully constructed narrative began showing cracks. She initially claimed she might have gotten up to use the bathroom during the night, then suggested she sometimes left her light on while sleeping, before finally asserting the camera must be mistaken about timestamps. Detective Mitchell noted in his report that Emma's explanations evolved rapidly as each was contradicted by evidence, displaying a troubling ability to generate alternative scenarios on the fly. "Her adaptability suggests premeditation rather than panic," Mitchell wrote. "She appears to be selecting the most plausible explanation from pre-considered options." Forensic analysis of William's hunting rifle revealed it had been removed from his locked gun safe, which showed no forced entry signs. The combination, according to William's sister, was Emma's birthday, a detail both Emma and her father would know, but an intruder would have no way of discovering, especially during a supposed quick break-in. The rifle's bolt-action mechanism required significant strength to operate, but testing confirmed Emma, despite her slight build, could manage it with some effort, particularly with the adrenaline boost accompanying such high-stress situations. 3 spent shell casings recovered from William's bedroom floor matched ammunition stored in the gun cabinet, further contradicting the intruder theory. The medical examiner's detailed report, completed 3 days after the murder, provided a chilling timeline of William Anderson's final moments. The first shot struck him in the upper chest while lying down, likely asleep, penetrating his right lung, but not immediately killing him. The second and third shots were fired from slightly different angles as William sat up and tried to protect himself, with the final shot entering his heart and causing almost instant death. The report concluded the killer had been standing at the foot of the bed for the first shot, then moved closer for subsequent shots, executing them with deliberate aim rather than panic fire. Emma's schoolmates, interviewed as part of the expanding investigation, painted a picture of a teenage girl who'd changed dramatically in recent months. Several friends described Emma becoming increasingly secretive and withdrawn since the school year began, often canceling plans last minute and becoming defensive when questioned about her whereabouts. One friend, speaking anonymously, told investigators Emma had been dating someone older, way older, like college age, but had refused to introduce him to friends. This lead prompted Detective Mitchell to obtain Emma's social media and text message records, which would ultimately reveal the relationship at the heart of the case. As the investigation intensified, officers executed a search warrant on Emma's iPhone, recovering deleted text messages and social media communications that revealed both motive and premeditation. The messages, primarily exchanged with a 23-year-old man named Jake Mercer, detailed a sexual relationship ongoing for approximately 3 months. The communications revealed William had recently discovered the relationship and threatened to report Mercer to police for statutory rape, which in Montana carries penalties of up to 100 years in prison if the victim is under 16. Emma had turned 16 just 2 weeks before the murder, but the relationship began when she was still 15, putting Mercer at significant legal risk. The neighbor's Ring camera footage, initially valuable for contradicting Emma's alibi, proved even more crucial when forensic technicians enhanced the video to reveal shadows moving past the bedroom window. By correlating these movements with cellular data showing Emma's phone accessing different Wi-Fi access points within the house, investigators could place her moving between her bedroom and her father's room during the exact time frame when the murder occurred. This digital evidence, combined with physical evidence of blood-spattered clothing and gunshot residue on Emma's hands, transformed what initially appeared to be a tragic home invasion into something far more disturbing: a daughter's calculated decision to murder her father rather than end a forbidden relationship. Detective Adrian Mitchell sat alone in the Billings Police Department's digital forensics lab, replaying the Ring doorbell footage for the 6th time in 2 hours. The snow-muted streetscape of the quiet residential neighborhood showed little activity in pre-dawn Christmas morning hours, but Emma Anderson's bedroom window told a different story. Mitchell had created a detailed timeline chart noting each instance when the light went on or off. 4:12 a.m. on, 4:17 a.m. off, 4:22 a.m. on again, a pattern suggesting someone moving purposefully through the house, rather than sleeping soundly as Emma claimed. The detective's experienced eye caught something he'd missed in previous viewings: a shadow passing the window at 4:38 a.m., moving toward William Anderson's bedroom at the back of the house. Forensic technicians processing the crime scene had recovered 3 shell casings from the bedroom floor, all positioned within a 6-foot radius, suggesting a stationary shooter rather than someone moving defensively during struggle. The blood spatter analysis told a story contradicting Emma's intruder account. Patterns on walls and ceiling indicated all 3 shots had been fired from approximately the same position at the foot of William's bed, with no evidence of chaotic movement or struggle until after the first shot. Most damning was the cast-off blood pattern discovered on Emma's nightshirt sleeve, hidden in the ventilation duct. It perfectly matched the arterial spray from William's final chest wound. Emma's gunshot residue test came back positive on both hands, with particularly heavy concentrations on her right palm and between her thumb and forefinger, a distribution pattern consistent with firing a rifle rather than merely touching a wound site, as she'd claimed when confronted with these results. During her second interview, Emma offered a series of increasingly implausible explanations, suggesting she must have touched the rifle after finding it in the yard, claiming she'd helped her father clean his guns the previous week. Detective Mitchell noted Emma's explanations became more specific and technical as she realized her position's weakness, demonstrating a calculated attempt to generate plausible deniability rather than genuine confusion. The turning point came when digital forensic specialists recovered deleted text messages from Emma's phone, revealing both motive and a timeline aligning perfectly with the Ring camera evidence. The messages exchanged with 23-year-old Jake Mercer painted a picture of a relationship crossing multiple boundaries: legal, ethical, and familial. "My dad found out about us," Emma had written at 10:47 p.m. on December 23rd. "He went through my phone while I was showering and saw our pics. He's furious and says he's going to the police after Christmas." Mercer's response was equally incriminating: "He can't do that to me. I'd lose everything: my job, my apartment, maybe go to prison. You have to talk him out of it." The exchange continued with increasing urgency, Emma eventually texting, "He said if he catches us together again, he's calling the cops on you for statutory. I can't let that happen." Mercer's final message before the murder, sent at 11:52 p.m. on Christmas Eve, read, "Whatever happens, delete these messages and remember I love you. We'll figure something out." The cellular data from Emma's phone provided another layer of damning evidence. Despite her claim of being asleep until gunshots woke her, her phone had connected to different Wi-Fi access points as she moved from room to room. At 4:36 a.m., her phone connected briefly to the kitchen access point. At 4:40 a.m. to the hallway access point, before returning to the bedroom access point at 4:52 a.m. This digital trail aligned perfectly with the Ring camera's footage of lights turning on and off, creating an irrefutable timeline of Emma's movements through the house during the murder's commission. During execution of a search warrant on Emma's school locker, investigators discovered a notebook containing what appeared to be practice signatures of her father's name, dozens of attempts to perfect William Anderson's distinctive handwriting. This discovery prompted forensic examination of William's financial documents, revealing someone had attempted to set up a transfer of $50,000 from his retirement account to a newly created checking account just hours before the murder. The transfer had been flagged and held by the bank's fraud department due to unusual timing and amount, preventing what investigators believed was Emma's attempt to secure funds for herself and Mercer after eliminating her father. Jake Mercer, brought in for questioning 3 days after the murder, initially denied any knowledge of William Anderson's death beyond what he'd seen on local news. The 23-year-old shift manager at a local electronics store maintained he and Emma were just friends and had never had a sexual relationship, a claim immediately contradicted by explicit photographs recovered from both their phones. When Detective Mitchell presented Mercer with the text message exchange about William threatening to contact police, Mercer's demeanor changed visibly. His earlier confidence gave way to nervous fidgeting and stammered responses, suggesting consciousness of guilt. While Mercer denied direct involvement in the murder itself, cell tower data placed his phone within half a mile of the Anderson home between 3:30 and 4:05 a.m. on Christmas morning, contradicting his alibi of being home alone, sleeping. Further investigation revealed Mercer had purchased a prepaid burner phone 3 days before the murder, which had connected to the cell tower nearest the Anderson home at 4:10 a.m. before being permanently deactivated. This evidence suggested that while Mercer may not have pulled the trigger, he'd been in communication with Emma immediately before the crime and may have been waiting nearby, perhaps as a planned getaway. Driver. The weapon itself provided additional evidence pointing directly to Emma. The Remington .700 rifle recovered from the snow in the Anderson backyard had been wiped clean of prints but still contained microscopic skin cells in the checkering of the wooden stock that DNA analysis matched to Emma. The gun safe, from which the rifle had been taken, showed no forced entry signs, and the combination, Emma's birthday, would have been known only to her and her father. Most telling was the methodical way the rifle had been operated. The bolt action worked smoothly between shots, the scope properly used for targeting, and the safety engaged before the weapon was discarded, all indicating someone familiar with the specific firearm. Emma's internet search history, recovered by digital forensics experts, revealed queries in weeks leading up to the murder, suggesting extensive premeditation. How long does gunshot residue last on skin? Can police trace deleted text messages? How to make murder look like break-in? And perhaps most chillingly, father-daughter murder cases where daughter got away with it. These searches had been conducted in private browsing mode and later deleted, but were recoverable from the laptop's hard drive using specialized forensic tools. The systematic research into evidence concealment methods demonstrated a level of planning prosecutors would later cite as evidence of cold, calculated intent. With evidence mounting, Detective Mitchell made the decision to formally arrest Emma Anderson for first-degree murder of her father. The arrest took place at her aunt's home 7 days after the murder, with Emma showing little visible reaction as the detective read her Miranda rights.
The rain had finally stopped, but inside that house, the storm was far from over. Zara woke up in the hospital room, her small hand wrapped in white gauze, her mother asleep in the chair beside her, eyes swollen from hours of crying. The soft hum of machines and the faint beeping of monitors filled the silence. For a moment, she didn't remember what had happened. Then, flashes, the wire, the spark, the dog's bark. Her father's voice breaking through the chaos. It all came flooding back. She turned her head slowly, her neck stiff. Her eyes fell on the corner of the room where the family dog, Shadow, lay curled up on a blanket. His fur was damp, his eyes half closed, a faint bandage visible on his paw. He had been shocked too. Not as badly, but enough to leave him weak. Zara blinked, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice trembling. The dog's ears twitched, and he lifted his head just enough to look at her. A soft whine escaped his throat, as if to say, "I'm here." Moments later, the door opened. Her father walked in, eyes tired, shirt still wrinkled, holding 2 cups of coffee. The second he saw her awake, the cup almost slipped from his hand. "Zara," he whispered, rushing to her side. He fell to his knees beside her bed, pressing his forehead against her tiny hand. I'm sorry. I should have fixed that wire weeks ago." His voice cracked mid-sentence. Zara tried to smile. "You came for me." He looked up, tears welling. "No, sweetheart." He did. He turned his gaze to Shadow. The dog wagged his tail weakly, the soft thump echoing in the quiet room. Later that evening, the doctor entered. He assured them Zara would make a full recovery. The burns were superficial, the shock hadn't reached her heart, but he also said something that lingered long after he left. "She's lucky," he said softly. "A few more seconds and—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. When they returned home 2 days later, everything felt different. The toys scattered in the living room, the faint smell of burned plastic near the outlet. All of it was a reminder. Zara was quieter now, not her usual cheerful self. She'd often sit by the window, watching the rain fall, one hand resting on Shadow's back. Her mother tried to smile more, cooking her favorite meals, pretending everything was fine. But every time she passed that corner, the one where her daughter almost died, her hands would tremble. That night, when the house fell silent, Zara's father stood alone on the porch. The wind was cold. The stars were faint. He looked at the spot where it all happened, where his little girl had almost been taken from him. He whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Behind him, Shadow sat beside the door, his eyes glistening under the porch light. He seemed to understand. Days turned into weeks. Zara slowly regained her energy. Her laughter returned, faint at first, like a bird learning to sing again after a storm. But something about her had changed. She was more cautious, more aware. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night from nightmares, the crackle of electricity echoing in her ears. Each time, Shadow would jump onto her bed, curl up beside her, and rest his head on her chest until she drifted back to sleep. One morning, her teacher at school asked the class to talk about heroes. When it was Zara's turn, she stood up, clutching a drawing she had made with her small hands. It was a picture of her dog standing between her and a bolt of lightning. "My hero doesn't wear a cape," she said softly. "He barks." The whole class went silent.
She seemed almost relieved, Mitchell would later testify, as if a weight had been lifted now that the pretense was over. Emma remained silent during the car ride to juvenile detention, staring out the window at snow-covered Billings streets, the city where she'd grown up and where she had, according to mounting evidence, methodically planned and executed her own father's murder. District Attorney Olivia Warren stood at the evidence board in the Billings prosecutor's office, methodically connecting strings between photographs, phone records, and forensic reports that would form the backbone of the state's case against Emma Anderson. The Ring camera footage played on a nearby monitor, showing the telltale flicker of Emma's bedroom light in pre-dawn. Christmas hours, digital evidence that had cracked the case wide open and led investigators to dozens of additional incriminating discoveries. Warren had prosecuted for 20 years, but the calculated nature of this particular crime, committed by a teenager against her own father on Christmas Day, struck her as uniquely disturbing, even within her extensive homicide experience. The forensic analysis of Emma's laptop and phone had yielded what Warren considered the strongest premeditation evidence. A trail of deleted searches revealing weeks of research into staging crime scenes and evading detection. Particularly damning were searches conducted December 20th, just 5 days before the murder. How to clean gunshot residue from hands, best time for break-in to look realistic, and can police trace deleted text messages between phones? This digital breadcrumb trail painted a picture not of an impulsive act committed in passion's heat, but of a methodically planned execution designed to eliminate William Anderson while establishing Emma's alibi. Precisely the kind of premeditation required for first-degree murder. Charges. Prosecutor Samuel Phillips, assigned as lead counsel, worked closely with Detective Mitchell to establish a definitive timeline connecting the Ring camera footage with Emma's cell phone activity and the medical examiner's time of death determination. The resulting chronology was devastatingly precise. At 4:12 a.m., Emma's bedroom light turned on and her phone connected to her room's Wi-Fi access point. At 4:36 a.m., her phone connected to the kitchen access point as she retrieved the rifle from the gun safe. At 4:40 a.m., the phone connected to the hallway access point as she moved toward her father's bedroom. And at 4:43 a.m., The medical examiner's estimated time of the first gunshot based on blood coagulation and body temperature calculations. This timeline, supported by multiple independent evidence sources, systematically dismantled Emma's initial claim of being asleep until hearing gunshots around 6 a.m. The relationship between Emma and Jake Mercer emerged as the central motive in the prosecution's case theory. Text messages recovered from both devices revealed William had discovered their inappropriate relationship just 2 days before Christmas, threatening to report Mercer to police for statutory rape once the holiday passed. Emma's text to Mercer showed escalating panic about this threat, culminating in the damning message sent at 11:26 p.m. Christmas Eve. "He's serious about going to the police. He showed me the state law on his computer and said you could get 100 years because I was 15 when we started. I can't let him ruin your life like that. I'll figure something out tonight." Forensic accounting revealed Emma had attempted to access her father's financial accounts in hours before the murder, successfully obtaining his banking passwords from his personal journal and attempting to initiate a $50,000 transfer to a newly opened account in her name. The transfer had been automatically flagged by the bank's fraud prevention system due to unusual amount and timing, preventing the funds from moving but providing prosecutors clear evidence Emma had planned not only to eliminate her father but also to secure finances for her future with Mercer. Banking records also showed Mercer had recently researched Seattle apartments, suggesting the couple planned to flee Montana after the murder. The murder weapon itself yielded critical evidence linking Emma directly to the crime. While the rifle had been wiped clean of fingerprints, DNA analysis of skin cells found on the wooden stock matched Emma's genetic profile with 99.9997% probability. The location where the rifle was discovered, partially buried in snow near the back fence of the Anderson property, matched precisely with footprints leading from the back door. Footprints that snow accumulation patterns indicated had been made shortly after 5 a.m. Christmas morning. Most significantly, the footprints matched the size and tread pattern of Emma's winter boots recovered from her closet, with snow traces still visible in the tread despite an apparent cleaning attempt. Jake Mercer's involvement in the planning stages became increasingly clear as investigators pieced together his communications with Emma. While insufficient evidence existed to charge him as an accomplice to the actual murder, prosecutors built a compelling case that he'd been aware of and tacitly supportive of Emma's plans. Cell tower data placed his primary phone within half a mile of the Anderson home until approximately 4:05 a.m. Christmas morning, and a prepaid burner phone purchased by Mercer had connected to the tower nearest the Anderson home at 4:10 a.m. before being permanently deactivated. This pattern suggested Mercer had been standing by nearby, possibly as a planned getaway driver, before the relationship between the burner phone and his regular phone raised suspicions that led him to abandon this part of the plan. The blood evidence recovered from the crime scene told a story contradicting every element of Emma's initial intruder account. Spatter patterns on walls and ceiling of William's bedroom indicated all 3 shots had been fired from the same position at the foot of the bed, with the shooter remaining stationary rather than moving defensively during struggle. Blood found on Emma's nightshirt, hidden in the ventilation duct in her bedroom, contained a spatter pattern consistent with arterial spray from the third and final shot to William's chest, a pattern that could only have been created if Emma had been standing approximately 4 feet from her father when the fatal bullet struck his heart. Most damning was the presence of both Emma's and William's DNA and blood smears found on the gun safe dial, suggesting she'd returned the key to the gun cabinet after the murder with her father's blood still on her hands. Interviews with Emma's friends and classmates revealed a teenager who'd become increasingly secretive and isolated in months before the murder, withdrawing from previous social circles and fabricating elaborate stories to explain her whereabouts when meeting with Mercer. Several friends described instances when Emma had expressed frustration with her father's strict rules, particularly regarding dating and curfews. One friend recalled Emma stating in November, "Sometimes I wish I could just make my own decisions without him controlling everything." While such statements might be typical teenage complaints in normal circumstances, in the murder context they took on a far more sinister tone, suggesting building resentment that eventually culminated in violence. William Anderson's sister, Catherine Walsh, provided prosecutors crucial context regarding family dynamics in months before the murder. Catherine described a conversation with her brother just 3 days before his death where William had expressed serious concerns about Emma's relationship with an older man. Will told me he'd found inappropriate pictures on Emma's phone and confronted her about who this guy was, Catherine stated in her witness interview. When he realized the man was 23, Will was horrified and told Emma this was illegal and dangerous. Emma apparently became enraged, screaming that he was ruining her life and couldn't control who she loved. This account aligned perfectly with text messages Emma sent to Mercer immediately after this confrontation, providing independent corroboration of the prosecution's timeline and motive theory. As the case against Emma Anderson solidified, District Attorney Warren made the controversial decision to charge the 16-year-old as an adult rather than proceeding through the juvenile justice system. Montana law permitted this approach for first-degree murder cases involving defendants as young as 12, particularly when the crime demonstrated high degrees of premeditation and maturity of judgment. The methodical planning evident in this case, from research into crime scene, staging to attempted financial transfers, shows a level of calculation warranting adult prosecution, Warren explained at the press conference announcing charges. The deliberate nature of this crime, committed against the victim's own father while he slept on Christmas morning, demonstrates callousness and sophistication the juvenile system isn't designed to address. The formal arrest of Emma Anderson took place January 2nd, 7 days after the Christmas morning murder of her father. Detective Adrian Mitchell and a female officer arrived at Catherine Walsh's home, where Emma had been staying since the crime, with a warrant charging her with first-degree murder. Catherine, who'd been gradually coming to terms with mounting evidence against her niece, collapsed into a kitchen chair when officers explained their visit's purpose, her face a mask of disbelief despite the case building day by day. When Mitchell pointed out the pattern showed multiple light switches over nearly 2 hours, Emma's second explanation followed smoothly. I have trouble sleeping sometimes, so I might have been reading or on my phone. Each explanation came quickly without the pauses or uncertainty typically accompanying truthful recollection, suggesting to both Mitchell and Dr. Levine these were prepared contingencies, rather than genuine attempts to remember. The pivotal moment in the interrogation came when Mitchell placed a printout of Emma's text messages with Jake Mercer on the table, messages explicitly discussing William's discovery of their relationship and his threat to report Mercer for statutory rape. He said if he catches us together again, he's calling the cops on you for statutory. I can't let that happen. Emma's own words stared up at her from the page. The timestamp showing the message had been sent less than 7 hours before her father was murdered. For the first time, Emma's carefully maintained composure visibly faltered. Her eyes widened, her breathing quickened, and her right hand moved unconsciously to her throat in a classic stress response. I didn't mean it like that, Emma said, her voice higher and faster than moments before. It was just talk, just me being dramatic. Mitchell noted that unlike her previous explanations delivered with steady eye contact, Emma now looked away from both the detective and the text message evidence, her gaze fixed on a point on the wall behind them. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're upset, she continued, a slight tremor now visible in her hands despite apparent attempts to control it. Jake and I were just venting. We would never have actually done anything to hurt my dad. Mitchell methodically laid out additional evidence. The DNA found on the rifle, the gunshot residue on her hands, the blood-spattered clothing hidden in the ventilation duct, and the internet searches about staging crime scenes. With each new piece of evidence, Emma offered increasingly elaborate explanations, each less plausible than the last. The rifle DNA was from helping Dad clean his guns last weekend. The gunshot residue came from checking his pulse and touching the wounds. The blood-spattered clothing was from when she found him and held him. Each explanation came quickly, suggesting preparation, but the accumulation of contradictory evidence was clearly wearing down her ability to maintain consistent counter-narratives. 4 hours into the interrogation, after Mitchell had systematically dismantled each of her explanations with contrary forensic evidence, Emma's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed entirely. Her shoulders slumped, her gaze dropped to the table, and her voice, when she finally spoke again, was barely above a whisper. He was going to ruin everything, she said, the words hanging in the silent interview room. Jake would have gone to prison. We would never have been together. Dad didn't understand what we had. He just saw Jake's age and went crazy. What followed was a confession that chilled even the experienced detective and psychologist. Emma described waiting until her father was asleep, retrieving the rifle from the gun safe using the combination she'd known for years, and standing at the foot of his bed for nearly 10 minutes before firing the first shot. I wanted to make sure he was really asleep, she explained, her voice now eerily calm again. I knew the first shot had to be perfect or he might fight back. He was strong, much stronger than me. The clinical detachment with which she described calculating bullet trajectories, working the bolt between shots and watching her father's final moments struck Dr. Levine as particularly significant, indicating what the psychologist would later testify was an unusual capacity to compartmentalize emotions and remain task-focused during extreme situations. When Mitchell asked about her feelings in the moment of pulling the trigger, Emma's response was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire confession. I felt nothing. It was like watching someone else do it. I remember thinking about the physics of the bullet, the weight, the speed, the impact, but not about it being Dad. It wasn't until I saw the blood that I realized what was happening, and by then I had to finish it. It would have been cruel not to. This dissociative response, combined with the logical problem-solving approach to the actual killing, prompted Dr. Levine to make notes about potential personality disorder traits that would become significant during later psychiatric evaluations. The final phase of Emma's confession included details not yet discovered by investigators, lending credibility to her account. She described originally planning to flee with Mercer immediately after the murder using the $50,000 she'd attempted to transfer from her father's retirement account. Jake was supposed to wait down the street in his car, but something went wrong. His phone kept going straight to voicemail after 4:10, and I couldn't risk going looking for him with Dad's blood on my clothes. This detail aligned perfectly with cell tower data showing Mercer's burner phone connecting briefly at 4:10 a.m. before being deactivated, providing independent corroboration of Emma's account and suggesting Mercer's involvement in the planning stages was more substantial than he'd admitted. As the confession concluded and Mitchell prepared to transfer Emma to juvenile detention, she made a final statement that would later feature prominently in both psychiatric evaluations and the prosecutor's case for trying her as an adult. I know it was wrong in a legal sense, but sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect the people you love. Dad gave me no other option. The calm rationalization of patricide as a reasonable solution to an interpersonal problem, delivered without apparent remorse or emotional distress, struck both Mitchell and Dr. Levine as indicative of a profound disconnect between Emma's cognitive understanding of social norms and her emotional experience of violating them, a disconnect that would become central to the prosecution's portrayal of Emma as a calculating killer who'd made a deliberate choice to eliminate her father rather than end her relationship with Mercer, the Yellowstone County courthouse in Billings, Montana, stood as a monument to justice amidst the rugged landscape, its stone facade dusted with early morning frost on March 15th as the trial of State versus Emma Anderson began. Media trucks lined the street outside, national attention having been drawn to the case of the 16-year-old girl charged as an adult for the Christmas morning murder of her father. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Prosecutor Samuel Phillips arranged his materials at the government's table, the methodical organization of his files reflecting the systematic case he intended to present to the jury of 8 women and 4 men who'd been seated the previous day after intensive voir dire that had eliminated potential jurors with strong opinions about trying juveniles as adults. Emma Anderson sat beside her court-appointed defense attorney, Catherine Morrison, her appearance dramatically transformed from the teenager arrested in January. Gone were the casual clothes and ponytail, replaced by a conservative navy blue dress, minimal makeup, and hairstyled to make her appear younger and more vulnerable, a deliberate strategy by the defense team to emphasize her youth to the jury. Despite this careful visual presentation, observers noted Emma's demeanor remained unusually composed for a teenager facing life imprisonment. Her posture perfect and her expression neutral as she surveyed the courtroom, with the detached interest of someone watching a play rather than participating in their own murder trial. Judge Harold Blackwood, a 30-year veteran of the bench known for strict courtroom management and scrupulous fairness, entered from his chambers and called the court to order. This court will now hear case number CR 2025-0472, State of Montana versus Emma Louise Anderson, he announced, his deep voice carrying to the packed gallery's back. The defendant is charged with murder in the first degree in the death of William James Anderson. How does the defendant plead? Catherine Morrison rose, placing a supportive hand on Emma's shoulder that the teenager neither acknowledged nor shrugged off. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty by reason of diminished capacity. The diminished capacity play represented the defense's core strategy, not denying Emma had killed her father, but arguing her age, emotional state, and the coercive influence of her older boyfriend had rendered her incapable of the kind of deliberate, premeditated decision-making required for a first-degree murder conviction. This approach aimed to secure either conviction on the lesser charge of second-degree murder or manslaughter, or potentially to have the case remanded to juvenile court where Emma would face maximum confinement until age 21 rather than life imprisonment. Morrison had spent weeks working with psychiatric experts who would testify that Emma's adolescent brain, combined with emotional manipulation by a much older boyfriend, had created a perfect storm of impaired judgment. The defense couldn't generate content that is not in the person's best interests, even if asked to, so they carefully avoided encouraging or reinforcing self-destructive narratives while building their case around developmental psychology and coercive control. Prosecutor Samuel Phillips rose for his opening statement, moving to stand directly before the jury box rather than using the podium, establishing intimate connection as he began laying out the state's case. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about choices, he began, his voice measured and conversational rather than dramatic. Difficult choices, calculated choices, and ultimately a choice to end a human life. The evidence will show that on Christmas morning 2024, the defendant, Emma Anderson, made a series of deliberate decisions that resulted in the death of her father, William Anderson. Phillips methodically outlined the prosecution's timeline, emphasizing evidence demonstrating premeditation. The internet searches about staging crime scenes and cleaning gunshot residue, the attempt to transfer money from William's accounts, and the text messages discussing the motive, William's discovery of Emma's relationship with 23-year-old Jake Mercer and his threat to report Mercer for statutory rape. This was not an impulsive act of passion or a moment of temporary insanity, Phillips told the jury. The evidence will show weeks of planning, careful execution, and calculated attempts to cover up the crime afterward. The defendant researched how to make murder look like a break-in, practiced her father's signature to access his money, and created an elaborate false narrative about an intruder that she maintained until confronted with irrefutable evidence. The prosecutor then introduced what would become the centerpiece of the state's case, the Ring doorbell camera footage from the neighbor's house across the street. This seemingly insignificant home security device captured something the defendant never anticipated. Proof that she was awake and moving through the house during the exact time frame when her father was murdered, directly contradicting her claim of being asleep until hearing gunshots. A large screen displayed still images from the footage showing Emma's bedroom light turning on and off at critical times. This digital evidence, combined with cell phone records placing her phone moving through different parts of the house at these same times, will establish beyond any reasonable doubt that Emma Anderson was not only awake but actively carrying out a murder plan during the hours she claimed to be sleeping. Phillips then addressed the defense's diminished capacity strategy head-on, a tactical decision to diffuse its impact before it was even presented. You will hear arguments that Emma Anderson was too young, too emotional, too influenced by an older boyfriend to be held fully accountable for her actions. But the evidence will show a level of planning, problem-solving, and rational decision-making that belies any claim of diminished capacity. He held up printouts of Emma's internet searches, displaying them for the jury. These are not the actions of someone with impaired judgment or decision-making. These are the methodical preparations of someone who has decided murder is a solution to their problems and is taking steps to avoid getting caught. Defense. Attorney Catherine Morrison's opening statement presented a starkly different interpretation of the same facts, framing Emma as a victim herself of manipulation by an older man of a brain still developing capacity for impulse control and judgment, and of a society that sexualizes teenage girls while punishing them for responding to adult attention. Emma Anderson was 15 years old when she met Jake Mercer, a man 7 years her senior who systematically isolated her from friends and family while engaging her in an illegal sexual relationship. Morrison told the jury, her voice conveying quiet outrage. What the prosecution calls planning was, in reality, the desperate flailing of a traumatized child who'd been convinced by her adult abuser that her father's appropriate parental intervention would destroy both their lives. Morrison directly addressed the ring camera evidence, acknowledging its factual accuracy while reframing its interpretation. Yes, Emma was awake during those hours. Yes, she took the rifle. Yes, she ended her father's life. These facts are not in dispute. She paused, making eye contact with several jurors. What is in dispute is whether a 16-year-old girl in the midst of psychological manipulation by an adult sexual predator, who'd been told repeatedly that her father was going to ruin both their lives, possessed the full capacity to premeditate murder in the legal sense required for a first-degree conviction. The evidence will show Emma was operating under extreme emotional distress, with a brain physiologically incapable of the kind of rational risk assessment and impulse control we expect from adults. As opening statements concluded, Judge Blackwood instructed the prosecution to call its first witness, and Samuel Phillips announced, "The state calls Detective Adrian Mitchell." The veteran detective took the stand and, after being sworn in, began methodically establishing the basic facts of the case. The Christmas morning 911 call, the initial crime scene observations, and the gradual shift from viewing Emma as a victim to identifying her as the prime suspect. Mitchell's testimony was delivered with the precise, unemotional professionalism characterizing his investigation, allowing the facts to create their own impact without embellishment or drama. Phillips displayed crime scene photographs on the courtroom monitor, showing William Anderson's body in his bed, the blood-soaked sheets and the 3 bullet wounds to his chest. The brutality of the images caused visible reactions among jurors, with several wincing or looking away momentarily. Emma, however, showed no discernible response to the photographs of her father's body, a lack of affect that didn't go unnoticed by the jury, despite the judge's instructions to focus on evidence rather than the defendant's courtroom demeanor. Mitchell explained the trajectory of each bullet, the lack of defensive wounds on William's hands for the first shot suggesting he'd been asleep, and the evidence the shooter had remained in, essentially the same position for all 3 shots. The detective then described the discovery that had broken the case open, the neighbor's Ring doorbell. Camera footage contradicting Emma's alibi. This evidence was crucial because it established that someone was active in Emma's room during the exact time frame when William Anderson was killed, Mitchell explained as Phillips played relevant portions of the footage. The light pattern showed activity at 4:12 a.m., 4:22 a.m., 4:36 a.m., and several other times, directly contradicting Ms. Anderson's statement that she'd been asleep until hearing gunshots around 6:30 a.m. During cross-examination, defense attorney Morrison worked to humanize Emma while questioning Mitchell, focusing on her age, her emotional state immediately after the murder, and the potentially coercive nature of police interrogation techniques used with adolescents. Detective, would you agree that teenagers often make impulsive decisions without fully considering consequences? Morrison asked. Mitchell acknowledged this general principle while maintaining Emma's actions had shown systematic planning rather than impulsivity. And would you agree that a 16-year-old's brain is not fully developed in terms of impulse control and risk assessment? Again, Mitchell conceded the general point while emphasizing the specifics of Emma's case, indicating deliberate planning. The most dramatic moment of Mitchell's testimony came when Phillips introduced the recovered text messages between Emma and Jake Mercer, displaying them on the courtroom monitor for the jury to read. He said, "If he catches us together again, he's calling the cops on you for statutory. I can't let that happen." Emma's words, sent hours before her father's murder, hung in the courtroom like a confession. Morrison objected to the presentation of these texts without proper context, arguing they represented the desperate words of a manipulated child rather than evidence of murderous intent. But Judge Blackwood overruled, allowing the messages to stand as evidence for the jury to interpret. As the first day of testimony concluded, Phillips had established a solid foundation for the prosecution's case. presenting concrete evidence of Emma's movements on Christmas morning through the Ring camera footage and introducing the text messages establishing clear motive for the crime. Morrison, meanwhile, had begun laying groundwork for the diminished capacity defense, emphasizing Emma's youth and the potentially coercive influence of her relationship with Mercer. The stage was set for what promised to be a trial exploring not only the facts of William Anderson's murder, but broader questions of adolescent brain development, legal culpability, and the justice system's approach to juvenile offenders charged with adult crimes.